I think if there has been any silver lining whatsoever with COVID, it's the fact that there has been this huge global spotlight on food supply systems and food security, and the recognition that farmers are at the very front line of food supply and food security, and also they're the frontline environmentalists as well.
For the rest of the week on Dirty Linen, we are going to be hanging around in the regions. I guess the topic still is staffing, labour, people, but it's with a particular focus on farms. I think early in the pandemic, when I first became really engaged with the issues around visa holders not being supported by the government to, I guess, sustain themselves through the pandemic, I thought first about hospitality, which is an industry that I'm closest to, but I also thought about farms because they are absolutely dependent on workers from overseas, a lot of backpackers, people on working holiday visas, and also people that are brought in especially to work on farms. To really tease out this issue, I am really excited to be chatting to Kim McDonnell, who launched Thankful, which we will hear more about. And then, I guess, branching off from that, Thankful for Farmers. They've got an incredible plan to not only solve this issue, but really engage younger Australians in regional life that we all rely on. So, Kim, welcome to Dirty Linen. Thank you so much for coming along to have a chat.
Thank you, Dani, and I appreciate the opportunity to have a chat.
So let's, I guess, start with a bit of a broad view of what Thankful is and a little bit about how you started it and why you started it.
Thank you. So Thankful is a social enterprise organisation, and we are both multi-product as well as multi-cause, which means that all of the big challenges in the world that we are all currently facing are challenges that Thankful can help address and find long-term solutions for. So how we work is we partner with brands who have identified what their purpose is, and we help them to create social impact opportunities to really demonstrate their commitment to that cause or that issue. So Thankful was conceptualized in Australia in 2013 and is the only global lifestyle brand in the world that is supported by more than 20 years of scientific research. And that research, which I could talk about all day, but the big takeout is that the act of being thankful is the single most powerful tool that we can all implement on a daily basis to improve our mental health and wellness. And in this new COVID world, we know just how important mental health and wellness is and how much it's impacting every single one of us on a daily basis. So it can play a critical role. So the way that we work is by partnering with those brands, co-branding product, and whether it's a Thankful for Women initiative, which we have launched in the US to promote gender equality and eliminate violence against women, or our Thankful for Farmers initiative, which we have proudly launched here in Australia to support sustainable agriculture and regional and rural communities, then we can help tackle some of those big challenges.
I love the scope and ambition and the way that you just confidently say that you can solve all the world's big issues. I mean, that is so great. How do you, why is this something that you did? What's your background?
My background, I spent all of my career in the advertising and marketing industry here in Australia, working for both large multinational agencies as well as smaller independent agencies. And after having a career, a successful career, and starting our own agency, which we eventually sold to a multinational agency as well, I wanted to use those skills to do good and to use those skills to create positive impact and to create change. So that's where I decided that a brand and an organisation like Thankful can have maximum social impact. And we developed a pretty innovative business model that was dependent and hinges around the fact that we have globally trademarked the word thankful as well.
Okay. Why is that good to globally trademark a word that we all use, hopefully, often, because we're so grateful for things?
And hopefully even more often. But the global trademark of the word thankful has allowed us to develop that business strategy where we can partner with brands and tackle some of those big issues through and similar to Product Red. I don't know if you're familiar with Product Red, but it was a social enterprise launched by Bono about 15 years ago now, where he partners with brands to co-brand product with the Product Red logo. And if you happen to have a red iPhone and you turn it over, you'll see the little Product Red logo on it. And it's a product for purpose model. So every single time there's a co-branding opportunity, then with Thankful as an example, and the same with Product Red, then we get a percentage of rev share from that product for purpose model, which helps us to create sustainable funding, which then helps us to provide funding and grants to organisations who are tackling some of those big challenges that the world is facing. So that revenue generating model actually allows us to be able to create that ongoing sustainable funding.
Okay. So the whole idea of being thankful and gratitude, it's a bit of a bumper sticker thing these days, like we're all supposed to have our gratitude journals. And it's I suppose it's something that you can let slide past you without really engaging with it and really finding the power in it. I know that there's 20 years of research and it's probably a lot to say, but are you able to just explain a little bit why it is so powerful and whether there's a better way to use it than I suppose just blithely thinking that you must be grateful for stuff?
Yeah, no, definitely. And, when we remember to be thankful, or we acknowledge what it is that we are thankful for in a meaningful way, and I think it's really important to remember it needs to be meaningful rather than just that flippant, oh, I'm thankful for the sun shining today. It does need to be a moment of reflection, and it does need to be meaningful, but it actually has a chemical reaction in our brains, in the front of our brains, and it changes our cortisol levels. But when I acknowledge somebody in my life that I'm thankful for, it actually has a chemical reaction, and I tell them it has a chemical reaction in their brains as well. So whilst you are having that chemical and endorphin rush at the front of your brain by being thankful and making you feel good, the person that you're telling you're thankful for is having a chemical reaction at the back of their brain, and it's making them feel good as well, and secure and comforted. So it is genuinely contagious. And the more that we practice and the more that we acknowledge what we have in our life to be thankful for, then the greater reaction, and it does become a neural pathway. So it becomes habit forming. So and thankful is certainly not going to solve your problems, or being thankful will not solve your problems, but it will allow you to look at them with a different perspective. And it's the whole glass half full versus glass half empty. So it helps to change our perspective on how we see the challenges that we're facing.
Yeah, it does resonate with me. I mean, I very consciously felt grateful when we were in lockdown for simple things like hot showers, and running water just seemed quite miraculous. And I guess, we were all in Melbourne, we were walking around in our 5K, perimeters, and there was, I guess I was grateful for the neighborhood I live in, and, starting to watch the flowers bloom as spring came on. And it's, I guess, in a way, being in isolation or being locked down or having your horizons shrunken does force you to take notice of things in a different way. And it was an opportunity that I appreciated, even while railing against some of the restrictions.
And I think it's in those really stressful times when it is most difficult to be thankful, or to find the little things in life to be thankful for, that being thankful can actually be the most powerful and the most healing. And there's other scientific benefits of being thankful, and it's been proven that it improves our immune systems with increased white blood cell counts, and research that's been done in the US. It's also been proven to improve relationships. So being thankful is multifaceted, and the pro-social benefits of being thankful are greater kindness, compassion, and empathy. And they're all the skills, soft skills, that the world needs so much of right now, particularly in this time of crisis.
Definitely. Okay, so let's talk about Thankful for Farmers. What's the aim with that?
So Thankful for Farmers was launched here in Australia last October with our ambassador, Matt Moran, who is a wonderful ambassador. He's obviously built his career in the hospitality industry, but he's also a fourth generation farmer. So when we launched Thankful for Farmers last October, Australian farmers were still living in the worst drought that we have experienced for a number of years. And then, of course, we had the bushfires, and then we had COVID. But launching last October, we launched because we wanted to change the conversation. We knew that it was a cluttered environment already, and there was lots of conversations and lots of supports around farmers, but a lot of those conversations were very much around charity, or a conversation of poor farmers, they need our help. And we wanted to shift that because and after speaking to farmers and other people in the industry, recognise that none of us like charity or pity, and our farmers are proud and resilient and an incredibly hardworking group of people, and what they want is recognition of the value that they bring to Australian culture and economies and societies, and our dinner tables every single day, 3 times a day. So it was an initiative to change that dialogue and to remind Aussie consumers, as we are walking around supermarkets and filling our trolleys with the most amazing quality of produce, to actually stop and think about the men and women who produce it for us, and to shift that value equation and to have that appreciation. We also wanted and are determined that funds that we are able to raise through our product partnerships are used to help address some of those systemic challenges facing Australian agriculture and regional and rural communities. So the funding that Thankful provides is used to address some of those big challenges, rather than Band-Aid or relief funding. And as much as we fully appreciate there is a need for that, we wanted to not continue to put Band-Aids on problems, but actually find solutions.
So what's an example of that?
So we are just in the process of looking at how we are going to allocate that first round of funding. But to give you an example, we have 3 key areas that we fund. So one is the farmer. How can we help the farmer to be more sustainable and practice sustainable agriculture moving forward? So there is that continued and long-term approach. The second is the farm. So is there technology that we can help to develop or help farmers to implement in order to have that sustainability? And the third is the farming community, because we recognise that if regional and rural Australia is not thriving, then it's very difficult for the agriculture sector to thrive. So what are the opportunities within regional and rural communities that we can help to ensure that they are thriving?
I mean, one of the things that people often talk about when they talk about producers is the fact that our very urban population is so disconnected from where food comes from. And I suppose it's interesting reflecting on what you said earlier about how being thankful creates those connections and those, I guess, neural networks that turn into personal networks, or have the possibility of turning into those, personal connections. That it's a different way of reconnecting people to where their food comes from.
Absolutely. And, I think as life has become incredibly busy, and there is a disconnect, and we don't often stop and think about, when we are sitting down at the dinner table or filling our trolleys with incredible produce, about how it's been produced, or the process that has produced our food, or the many hands that have touched it before we even get the opportunity of being able to consume it. And so that big education and connection from farm to plate, and reminding and get Aussie consumers about the men and women who produce it, and introducing them to those men and women who produce it for us, and just how significant agriculture is in our lives in so many ways. From the cotton and the clothes that we wear, we need a farmer to have produced that in the first place, or the sheep and wool that we have. And agriculture touches so many different industries.
Well, I mean, you might be lucky enough to go through your life without visiting a hospital, but it's impossible for you to go through your life and not need a farmer, not need somebody to grow your food. Like when you talk about essential industries, like it's very fundamental.
Absolutely. And I think if there has been any silver lining whatsoever with COVID, it's the fact that there has been this huge global spotlight on food supply systems and food security, and the recognition that farmers are at the very front line of food supply and food security. And also, they're the frontline environmentalists as well. So there has been a increased recognition of just how critical farmers are.
Absolutely. Okay, well, let's talk about your new initiative. So, I guess using the lens that I kicked off with, that there's this international labour force that simply isn't around in any, to its normal degree this summer. Can you talk about, the impacts of that and a potential solution?
Sure. So, COVID has obviously impacted all of our lives in so many ways, and agriculture is no exception. And with the closing of international borders and even some state borders as well, it has meant that the seasonal labour force that agriculture is so dependent upon in this country has been disrupted. And about a month ago, EY produced a report which actually quantified what that labour shortage is, and that labour shortage is 26,000 workers. Deloitte released a report in July as well, which estimated that if we can't address this labour shortage, then there will potentially be a shortage of produce on supermarket shelves across Australia, and potential price increases, and in some instances up to 60% on supermarket shelves by Christmas as well, which in the current economic crisis, there's very few Aussie families who can afford increases in the cost of fresh produce and fruit and vegetables. In the last couple of months, we have seen and heard so many stories of farmers who have been struggling and having to make heartbreaking decisions about what they do harvest and what they don't harvest, and what they have to either allow to rot on trees or plough back into the ground. And whether it's lettuce farmers in Western Australia, or spinach farmers in Victoria, or zucchini farmers up in the Burdekin in Queensland, they're all making these decisions, and millions of dollars of produce is going unpicked because there is simply not the labour force, and is being ploughed back into the ground. And as a consequence of that, farmers are now having to make the incredibly tough decisions about what do they plant next season, because this labour shortage is not a short-term problem, and the opening of international and state borders, we don't know when that's going to happen. So if we don't have the labour, there is no point them planting the same quantity that they would normally plant, because it's not going to be able to be harvested. So they're making those decisions now, which could potentially lead to not just short-term but longer-term implications around availability and produce that is available. And obviously, everybody in the entire food supply chain is impacted by this. It's not just the farmers and their incomes and their livelihoods. It's the regional communities that the seasonal workers come into these regional communities and live there for the harvest period. So they're bringing in economic benefits as well. Those regional communities are suffering as a consequence of not having these workers. And then every single person in the food supply chain, all the way up to the consumer, ultimately will be impacted if we can't address this. So Thankful for Farmers is launching an initiative to, one, raise awareness that this is a challenge, but it's also an incredible opportunity for us collectively as a nation to be able to work together to mobilise a workforce to create a long-term sustainable pipeline of labour out into regional and rural Australia, so that we're not as dependent upon international labour, whether it's international seasonal workers or that backpacker community in our food supply chain, so we can reduce some of the fragility around that.
So, who are you going to get to do these jobs then, Kim? What's the idea?
So they're obviously the demographic of 18 to 25-year-olds are the most mobile group in Australia. So we are talking specifically to that demographic, and there's a whole bunch of school leavers who are about to finish school, and we know that school leavers, 25% of them take a gap year every single year, and they normally head off overseas and backpack their way around South America or Europe, and that's not going to happen in this current COVID world. So we're looking at encouraging them, instead of backpacking, to pickpack, and to pickpack their way around Australia. And yes, it's going to be hard work, because it absolutely is hard work, but it's also an opportunity to have an adventure of a lifetime, and to explore your own back garden, and to learn new skills, and to create new friendships, and to be part of that regional rural community Australia, which is so welcoming. Yeah, and would love to
Yeah.
have more Aussies out there.
I mean, it sounds good, but I've heard so many stories from backpackers that have come here to pick fruit, and they're not great stories about some of the conditions that they've had to work under. And those working holiday visa holders, I mean, um, they are incentivized to spend their 88 days in the regions, so that they can get an extra year on their visa, and then they can get a third year as well with some more days in the regions. A lot of those people don't have an incredibly nourishing experience. Like, it can be, of course the work can be really hard, and that's just what it is, but the conditions aren't always great. And I mean, I'm wondering, do you reckon that young Australians will put up with that, or do you think the conditions need to change? I mean, do you think that there has to be a bit of a reassessment throughout the whole industry to make this plan work?
I think there's always going to be stories where people have not necessarily had the best possible experience, and unfortunately, it's a small minority of stories that often get the most news, and have the impact, and the stories that people hang on to. And I think undoubtedly there is an appetite from regional and rural Australia and farmers, and a recognition that things need to be done differently in the future, in terms of a labour force, and how can collectively both Australian Australians and the Australian labour force, as well as the farmers, come together on this to create a whole new supply chain of workers heading out to Australia, and what's going to work for both. So I think everyone is willing to, and recognises the need that things need to be done differently in the future to make this work, and for it to be sustainable. So, and many farmers are absolutely, the majority of farmers are very committed to making sure that it is a great experience, and certainly not an unpleasant experience.
Yeah. I wonder, I mean, where my mind naturally goes with this is that food actually does have to cost more, or perhaps the supermarkets have to pay more for Australian produce for the system to work better.
It, it's interesting, and speaking to several farmers, they have said exactly that. And going back to the very reason for Thankful for Farmers, it's to change that value equation, and to change the narrative.
Yeah.
And if we
Yeah.
recognize the number of hands and the process that food has to go through in order for us to be able to have the luxury of it appearing in our supermarket shelves and then on our dinner tables, then we will fully appreciate just how much effort goes into it, and therefore we wouldn't expect it to be at particular price points. And the case in point is milk. If we understood the process that dairy farmers go through to enable milk to be in our supermarkets, then there is no way we would expect to pay $1 a litre for milk, as an example. So
Yeah.
the more understanding there is, the more acknowledgement there is, and the more recognition there is, then it's going to be a much easier conversation with consumers, and with farmers.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because, your contention begins with this idea that if people can't get their produce off to market, then the price of produce goes up. But then we sort of circle back around to this idea that prices actually do need to go up, but they need to go up because the produce is being picked and valued, and brought to market in such a way that returns its real value back to the people that have put the work into growing it.
Correct. Prices, we don't want prices going up because of scarcity. We want prices to go up because there is that recognition of the value that it brings to our lives on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I suppose then I think, well, we started this by saying people can't afford to pay more for food because it's tough times. But then I guess it's like, well, if people do pay more for food, perhaps they just also need to learn how to use it better. And I know that food waste is such a problem, in households, that perhaps if we are paying, let's say, not the 60% that you've flagged might flow from scarcity. Perhaps if it's a 20 or 30% that might flow from paying the farmers properly, then perhaps people will be able to recoup that by making more of their produce when it hits the home.
And food wastage is obviously a huge challenge, and there's a global stat that approximately 30% of all food that is produced does not even make it to supermarket shelves. And that is a stat that's just as relevant here in Australia as well. So I think there is, and we're seeing more and more of it with imperfect produce, which nutritionally is just as good as any other produce. It just doesn't look quite as good. So I think it's all very much part of the same conversation. How can we reduce wastage? How can we make sure that the food that we are consuming is as nutritionally sound as possible and as fresh as possible? And to do that, we need to shorten the gap between farm to plate as well. So it is a complex infrastructure. It is a complex problem, but it captures everything from sustainable agriculture and the way the food is produced, all the way through to food wastage and labour integrity as well.
Yeah, it's. I mean, when you start talking about it, you realise that it is all so connected. And I guess it's back to that idea of being thankful, being a way to connect as well. So yeah, it does seem like a very rich way to look at things. Can you talk about some of the ways that you plan to incentivise this pick packing journey? Just I've had the privilege of having a look at your campaign, and I love some of these initiatives around stickers and passports, and I guess highlighting the people that have taken themselves off to the regions and picked produce.
Yes, so one of the things that we are looking to do, we want this to be a genuine adventure, and we want this to be a positive experience for all Australians. And if we can, as part of this process, reignite a love of regional and rural Australia, then that is something that we're committed to doing as well. So we're working with a number of different brands and organisations to incentivize and to reward and to recognize just the contribution that pickpackers will make to Australia, and the fact that pickers will be playing a significant role, and engaging with them post and throughout their experience, and also engaging with different audiences. So looking to parents so that they can proudly say, my kid's a picker and helped out this summer, or is pickpacking their way around Australia. So putting some kudos around that. So we've got some great initiatives scheduled, and we're very much looking forward to launching.
Yeah, it sounds great. Well, I've got teenagers, and I would definitely put this in front of them and tell them to get out there because, yeah, they're not going to be backpacking through Europe. And I think, as a parent, I also think it would be great for them to be, out there getting a bit sweaty and dirty, and really gaining a sense of where their food comes from. And I suppose once you've been part of that labour chain that brings food to the table, hopefully that creates a generation of consumers that really do understand that they need to be thankful for the food that is so abundant in Australia.
And I think once you've been part of the food supply chain as well, you have that appreciation. So you are more likely to want to acknowledge and be thankful for the fact, because you understand just how hard it is. So if we can, you're so right, if we can get that whole generation having that experience, then it's going to have a generational and multi-generational impact as well.
So, Kim, where should people look out for the launch of this campaign and how they can engage with it?
So we are launching next week, and we're launching with a website as well as with multiple partners, and there will be social media around it as well. So if they continue to check the Thankful for Farmers website, they'll be able to see all the details and directions of where to go and what's next.
Brilliant. So, Kim, any final words on the work that you're doing and how we could engage with it or think about it or think about being thankful for stuff?
Yes, I think, one of my favourite proverbs is that if you want to go fast, you go alone, but if you want to go far, you go together. And it's so important that we do all work on this collaboratively, and we recognise that this is an incredible opportunity to do things differently. And if we all come together and address some of the big challenges that the world is facing, then we're going to have a far greater impact working together than we are individually. So we are very open to collaboration, and we believe it's the only way that we can have that positive impact in the world. So would encourage everybody to check out our Thankful for Farmers, and also to check out Thankful to see what is possible. It's thankful.org or Thankful for Farmers with the numeric 4.com.au, and encourage you all to be part of this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kim. It's really exciting to hear, the energy and I guess thoughtful research and optimism that you're putting into this project. And I look forward to engaging with it for a long time to come as we go far together.
Thank you so much, Dani, and looking forward to that.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.